There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Matthew. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store.
So Jesus there had to have been speaking about a future time. And one of these listeners here at the Olivet Discourse was the Apostle John, who also wrote the letter of 1 John. And in that letter, in chapter 2, verse 18, John wrote, "Little children, it is the last hour. And as you have heard, the Antichrist is coming. And even now, many Antichrists come, by which we know that it is the last hour." And so this is how it looked 2,000 years ago. And here, the word Antichrist, it doesn't mean the against Christ or the opposite of Christ. It actually means the instead of Christ. And right here, when John's reading, he's not talking about the Antichrist, the one in Revelation where it talks about Satan possessing a man. But what he's saying here, that before Jesus returns and before the end, a lot of us will be deceived and that we will offend one another. And just like it says here, that there will be a lot of lawlessness. There already is a lot of lawlessness in the church today. And we can see that these sins that are condemned in the Bible, that they're celebrated actually in other Christian church denominations. And then it says that the love of many, Jesus says, will grow cold. And the love in many churches, well, it can be very cold. And you can feel very lonely in the church today. And the loss of love in the church, well, it's been mentioned all the way back to the book of Revelations in the church of Ephesians, back in the first century, where it's recorded, where it says that they lost their first love. And people may think that Jesus is just talking about the world's love growing cold. But I'm pretty sure that the world never ever had any love to begin with. And I also believe this because the word that Jesus uses for love here, it's that Greek word agape. So the love that grows cold is the agape love. That's God's love. That's the love God tells us that we're supposed to have for each other. So I believe that this cold love here, he's talking about us. And then Jesus says, "But he who endures to the end will be saved." And so you might be thinking, well, so if I endure all this, and if I can just hold on to my faith long enough through all these hard times, is that what it's going to take me to be saved? But that's not what Jesus is talking about here. Jesus isn't talking about our personal salvation. What Jesus is talking about is that for the believers that are here on earth at this time, that the Lord's going to come and deliver them, and that they will be saved from this hour. And so he's possibly talking about the rapture here. And then Jesus says the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations. Then the end will come. And some will tell you, they'll say, well, this has already happened, and that the end must be very close because the gospel has already been preached by all the churches, because that's part of our Great Commission. But really, this isn't really dependent on the church. Because if you read in the book of Revelation in chapter 14, we're told, and this is what it says, "I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people." And so now, Jesus, he's talking about the end, and that after all these things have occurred, then Jesus, he starts the next part of this, and his first word there is therefore. All right. So So with a therefore, that means that you have to take that everything Jesus has said up until this point, and you have to consider all of that. And now you have to apply what we've just heard to this next part. And so the rule of thumb is when you come in across a therefore in the Bible, what you say to yourself is you say, well, what is it there for? That's how you think of therefore. And so now verse 15, it starts with, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, and then it says, whoever reads, let him understand. Okay, well, first, that word abomination, at this time in Judaism, that means a very extremely offensive form of idolatry. And so this phrase literally in Greek would mean a desolate sacrilege. And the holy place that it's talking about, that only means one thing. The holy place is the holy place inside of God's temple. So this isn't inside the temple of God itself. And some people will try to tell you that this has already happened in 70 AD. But the truth is that the Romans, they didn't set up any idols inside the temple before they destroyed it. And so this has to be referring to a temple that hasn't been built yet. And there is this group in Israel, and it's made up of Orthodox Jews, and it's called the Temple Institute. And they have been preparing for the rebuilding of what they call the third temple since 1987. And they even have this huge menorah on display that they're going to put into the temple. And it's right out there for the public to see, right outside the Wailing Wall. And they had this big celebration when they had built it and they had presented that to Israel. There was these parades, and you can probably see it on a video online. And they've already prepared all the utensils for the serving in this temple. And they have all their garments. And you can go to their website and you can see all the different things that they've prepared. And you can even go to their website and you can make a donation if you want to. I don't think I would, because it's the Antichrist that's really going to take over in that temple. So I wouldn't be donating, but you can. And this Temple Institute, they're really close to getting a red heifer, because they've been looking for a red heifer. They found two that they thought might be the right one, that they found a little bit of faults with. But they're very close, because they're going to need that red heifer, because that's going to be able to sanctify the temple so that they will be able to enter the temple. Okay, and then what we read here is we read, whoever reads, let him understand. And even though that part here, if you look at your Bible, that's not written in red letters like the most of this chapter is, they were probably spoken by Jesus. It's probably not just a commentary from Matthew. And what Jesus is trying to say here is he's saying, don't miss this. Don't miss what Daniel spoke about the abomination of desolation. Because if you miss this and you don't understand it, you won't understand anything about the abomination of desolation. Because this part here, Jesus isn't speaking for the sake of the disciples. And he's not even really speaking this to the church. Who he's speaking this to is an audience that will be reading this sometime in the future. And that's because this whole section here is Jewish. And it's actually written to the people that will actually see the abomination of desolation being set up right in front of them. And so this is written for the Jews that are living in Jerusalem at the time of the end. And you can tell that's true because all the things that Jesus is talking about here, they're all Jewish things about being on the housetops and not going down. Because all the Jews, they have patios on top of their housetops. They don't have big yards. That's part of their living area. And about it being on the Sabbath, because only Jews care about the Sabbath. Because on the Sabbath, everything is shut down and you can only travel so far, a Sabbath day journey. And then it talks about Judea, and that's the area where Jerusalem is. So these are all instructions for the Jews living in Jerusalem at the time. And they're the ones who will be reading this. And so to have this happen, so just for this to even to be able to occur, first of all, you're going to have Jews living in Israel at that time. Well, Jews hadn't lived in Israel until 1948. They'd been displaced out of that land for over 2,000 years. And then you'd also have Jews living in Jerusalem. Well, the Jews, they didn't have control of Jerusalem until 1967, and they won that during the Six-Day War. But for us to understand the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel, we'll have to look at Daniel chapter 9. And in Daniel chapter 9, what that is that's a vision that was given to Daniel by the angel Gabriel. And this is, again, about the 70 weeks. And it says, 70 weeks determined for your people. Now, Daniel's people were the Jews. And we've already talked about this a little bit before. And that term week here used is not talking about a week of days, but it's talking about a week of years, because the word week in Hebrew is the word heptad. And all that means it's a period of 7. So you could have a heptad that would be, it could be a heptad of days, which would be what we call a week, 7 days. But you could also have a heptad of years. And that's what it means here. It means years. And so this 70 weeks, if you add it all up, well, that's 490 years. But now these 70 weeks, they're all broken up into 3 different parts. And the first part in Daniel, it'll talk about the 7 weeks, which is 49 years. And that talked about when Jerusalem was going to be rebuilt. So that 7 weeks is already gone. And that's when the temple worship was restored. And you can read about all those things in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. All right. Now, the second part of those 70 weeks is called the 62 weeks. And we had just studied that just a few weeks ago, because that's when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the donkey's colt. That was the triumphal entry. And that just happened from where we're reading today. That was like 3 days before him having this talk. And what Daniel says, that after the 62 years where we are, it says that the Messiah is to be cut off. Well, from this time when Jesus is given this speech, he's about to die. And about a day later, he will die on a cross and he will be cut off. Okay, so now if you do all your math and you have your 7 weeks and then you have your 62 weeks, right? You add all those up and you have 69 weeks. But it says there's 70 weeks determined for his people. So the Jews, they have 1 week left. So there's 1 week left for Daniel's people. And so this week that's determined for the Jews, it's this last 7-year period. But that's also the time that we call the time of Jacob's trouble. And that's what it's called in Jeremiah 30. And it's the same thing that we call the 7 years of tribulation in the book of Revelation. But this 7-year period, it's not chronological like with the other 69 weeks. But this week comes after the age of the Gentiles. Because right now, when Jesus dies, the whole focus will go to the church.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.